Welcome, Jeff Nijsee. Welcome to the Everyday Investor. How are you?
Thank you, Darcy. Yeah, I'm doing well. Happy to be here.
Cool. Tell us though before we start, like, what do you do? I know that you're very smart in this space of blockchain and all that sort of stuff. So
well,
tell us how that happened.
we'll see about that. I'm a guy. I would describe myself as like a Bitcoiner. I'm also a technologist, though, and I'm academic. So I'm a teacher and a researcher. So all things combined. My teaching career started teaching physics. I sort of love physics at its core, at my core, and it branched out from there to teach some math. And now, actually, I'm into Bitcoin, blockchain, and cryptocurrencies. And so I teach a couple courses at AUT.
Let's start off the discussion. We're going to be talking about Bitcoin. I've been reading some stuff out of Fidelity. So Fidelity, one of the largest fund managers in the world, $4.5 trillion under management, maybe closer to 5 trillion. They're one of the major players, I guess, that will be in this Bitcoin spot ETF race. And so there's a lot of speculation, first and foremost. Like, maybe let's just start right there. I know it's not necessarily what we're going to be talking about, but that is
Yeah.
something that's on the minds of a lot of people right now. As just like last night, I think the price of Bitcoin tipped over $42,000.
Yep.
And I guess that ages the show right away, right? Because it'll probably be completely different when everyone's listening to this. But what does the ETF mean in terms of price action?
Yeah. As soon as you talk about price, you put yourself in the news category, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's right.
What's the ETF mean? I think a lot of Bitcoiners are interested in the ETF because it's going to give a lot more exposure, but essentially they're not really too. I mean, everyone's interested in the number go up, but they're not really too interested in like what does the ETF mean for everyday folks to be able to have some exposure to Bitcoin. So we can come to that, but primarily, um, at least from our point of view, right? There's other ETFs that you can also have exposure to. There's a couple in Canada,
That's
right?
right. Yeah.
But they don't have the weight, right? That BlackRock, that
Mm.
Fidelity has, and that some of these other ones have. And so, where's all the money? Well, you could say like a lot of the money is in, asset classes or cities, but like all of the money can be traced back to America pretty much.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people in America that right now just are, not able to, either for technical reasons or because there's no instrument, are not able to get in to Bitcoin.
If you were really more coming at it from a technologist point of view and you were a Bitcoiner through and through, the price action is really just one of the many indicators that you're looking to just to validate your own thesis, right? Like, if you're into Bitcoin because you believe it is a monetary good, it is an alternative financial system that can set people free and fix the money and fix the world type thing, like a lot of that idealism stuff. I think the price action is really just a way to confirm that or show what the score is, right?
Well, it's definitely important because if number continues to go up or at least hold steady, right? Let's try to avoid the giant crashes, but
Yeah.
that absolutely validates this thing. And people go, oh, hang on, Bitcoin is still around.
Yeah.
What's the price? Oh, I had no idea. I thought it did this. I thought it did that.
Yeah.
And I think we're nowhere near any type of equilibrium, which
Yeah.
I'm not sure if people are still talking about it. It used to get talked about, like what, when the asset is ready to be listed as an ETF, there's going to be, some volatility band or whatever. Is the price is going to be relatively stable, and I don't think we're anywhere near seeing
No.
that.
No.
What we have here, and Fidelity has definitely identified it, is store of value assets, e.g., gold.
Yeah.
Only how much better is gold in digital form than real gold that you have to dig up and
Yeah.
can't verify and have to carry with you and can be robbed? All this stuff.
Yeah.
And so, as a store of value, and they talk about this in here too, it's easy to criticize Bitcoin saying, oh, it's too slow, it's too expensive, you can't use it as cash, right? But the people that believe in it and are into it, they know that too. They're not disputing that. And there's other things we can do about that.
Yeah, it's like the arguments are on a different, like the theater of battle is very different when you're in Bitcoin than when you're out of it. Everyone's arguing about whether or not it can be replicated, copied, and there's so many cryptos. How do you know this is the one? And governments will one day shut it down. All these battlefields for those arguments are not at all what actual people who understand it are interested in, because they've already kind of gone through the learning, haven't they? And they've kind of dismissed it, not dismissed it because they are ignoring it. They've dismissed it because they've looked at the story and then put it in the shelf that it needs to be in, and then moved on, right?
One of my favorite things to talk about with my students, particularly my math students, right? Calculus is a very hard subject
Yeah.
if you're not math inclined. And so one of the things I like to talk about is this idea of time. And, it's not that calculus is tricky, right?
Yeah.
There are bits of calculus that are tricky, but even now, right, I'm going to dispute my own point here. It's not that it's tricky; it's that we don't have the time to dedicate to learning this stuff, and we don't have the time. We maybe also don't have like the step-by-step scaffolding that's required to get us there. You do your step one, and you do it repeatedly. You do your step two, you do it repeatedly, and by the time you do step three, step one becomes a little bit more clear. And so, giving yourself this time, and this is what Bitcoiners are great as, particularly because they have skin in the game. They're great at putting in the time and saying, well, hey, if I'm going to invest, my own 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 or more, dollars into this thing, I'm going to put aside some time to learn, to read, to think about what can go wrong, right? And to you got to try it. You got to get your hands dirty, right? You got to plug in this miner right here, right? And you got to see what is in the background propping everything up. You got to see how the transactions work and are packaged together. Unfortunately, you might also have to lose some crypto along the way and learn from that, just like people get scammed in various industries in various ways.
Okay. From a mechanical point of view, I was going to say technical, but really this is more mechanical. So you've got a mining machine here on the desk. What can you tell me about what we're looking at? I'm looking at two boxes here. Right. One big one with a couple of fans on it.
So this one here, it's particularly outdated, but we can talk a little bit about that now as well. So this is a Bitmain S9, and this is like, to use an analogy, this is like the AK-47 of Bitcoin mining here.
Nice.
So these were mass produced, and because there's so many chips in here, they ended up being very efficient for a relatively long time. They're now outdated, but about 4 or 5 years ago, the S9 here was running a lot of the Bitcoin network. And so this is one unit, a Bitcoin miner. The smaller box here is just your power supply, just like you have in a tower PC. And so you've got your standard cable here. And we were looking at it earlier. It can pull about 1,600 watts, and it's noisy.
Yeah, definitely very noisy.
And it's hot.
Yeah. And so what's going on? So we've got this power box. It's putting power into the circuit boards, I guess, and there's some pretty full-on computations going on. You plug it into the Ethernet cable. This effectively is the thinking engine or the brain, which is solving complex mathematical equations. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, I mean it's more like a slave, and it's not solving any equations at all. So one of my bugbears, right, grinds my gears. One of the primary misconceptions is that these things are like crypto puzzles, right? Like the miners are out there, and like we hold them up and we're like, oh, my miner is finding my Bitcoin, right?
Right.
It's a lottery. I'll just ask you a question. How many chips do you think are in here?
Oh, I don't know, maybe 100 or so.
Maybe 100. Yeah. So there's 189.
Okay. All right.
And to give you a comparison, your iPhone has like 8 or 9 chips.
Okay.
Not a fair comparison. All those chips do different things. All these chips, all they do is solve SHA-256. So it's just an algorithm. It's a recipe.
Okay.
You put into the blender, you put a block, has a bunch of transactions, which is just data saying that Jeff sent Darcy 1 coin. Okay. You put all this into the blender, and the SHA-256 algorithm blends it up.
Right.
And when it's done, you get a random string.
Right.
And then we're going to use that random string and compare to something. And if it's lower, we're going to say you won.
Okay.
So it's a lottery. So you've got like a threshold, and you've got the miner here calculating SHA-256, outputs a random string. And if you meet the target, then you win. And if you win, you get a reward. If you don't meet the target, which happens most of the time, then you go back and you do it again. And so that's what these are doing. They're just slavishly churning out SHA-256 hashes, quick comparison to the target in the network. And whoever finds the first winner gets the right to publish a block and earn a block reward.
Right. So this algorithm or this blender machine is generating that string, and that string needs to be did you say it needs to be lower than the target, or?
Yeah, so there's a target difficulty level. And what you want to do is you want to be able to meet that target difficulty level. And that difficulty level is going to, if you look at the chart, the difficulty level is going to go up. And
Right.
so that means it gets harder and harder to meet the threshold.
Right.
And so it's like in the lottery, you might need one number to win a $10 jackpot.
Yes.
But if you match all 7 numbers, right, you can win $10 million.
Right.
And so the more and more requirement, the harder it is to meet. If I want to participate in the network, I plug in my machine. If you want to participate, you plug in yours.
Yeah.
But now we've got twice as many people competing for the same lottery.
Right. Okay.
And because you're doing it as fast as you can, right, we're going to find the blocker. We're going to meet the target in half the time because we've doubled the capacity. Which is great. Satoshi thought of this and he said, well, to prevent people from gaming the system, meaning like large corporates or nation states, which have unlimited capital, what we're going to do is we're going to adjust the network difficulty. So if blocks come in too quickly, which means that there's a lot of capacity in the network, finding blocks a little bit faster than the network wants,
right,
then the difficulty adjusts upward.
Right.
And now everyone has to put in a little bit more effort to
Right.
find the same rewards.
Okay. It seems like the harder you work to achieve it, or the more computational power there is behind this mining activity, the more elusive it gets. Is that right?
That is right. Yeah.
It gets further away in a way, isn't it?
That's right. So the difficulty, it gets much harder to capture that block, which prices people out. So it prices out an old miner like this.
Right.
It prices out small miners, and the way around this is people join up together and they collaborate in pools.
Right.
And then there might be some guaranteed payout whether or not their specific miner meets the requirement. But yeah, it gets harder and harder.
Right.
And that is the first graph
right.
that we're looking at here.
Okay.
And so my question to you is, can you see where COVID hits in this chart?
Yeah, I'm going to say right in the middle, there's like a little bit of a dip there.
Yeah, right in the middle, there's a little bit of it.
So just for those that are listening on audio only, we're looking at a graph, and it basically goes upwards and to the right, almost like a hockey stick, but halfway through it kind of dips down. So it's obviously this is tracking something. What are we looking at here?
Okay, so the orange here is Bitcoin hash rate in the network.
Yeah.
And so hash rate is a metric, very unique only to Bitcoin, right? It's how many of these are plugged in the network at any given time.
How many mining rigs are plugged into the network?
That's right. How many, I mean, narrow it down to individual hashes or chips, but yeah.
Sure.
How many people, how many rigs, right? And it's physical, real hardware, right?
Yeah.
People are not outsourcing this to AWS to run their hashing for them, okay?
Right. Okay.
People have to purchase the hardware and they have to get the electrical source and they have to plug it. You got to send some dude, some gal to go plug it in.
Got it. Okay.
Let's go to graph 2.
Again, it's sort of going upwards and to the right, but a little bit more volatile this time.
Right. So S&P since 2018. I'm not like a big macro guy. I just picked like something general to track the economy, right?
So we're just looking at the performance of the share market over this same period of time.
That's right. And so now we've got the years on there so we can identify COVID, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're pointing right at it, March 2020, and we have a very steep decline in the S&P. Yeah. We actually recovered tremendously quick. That's a topic for another related topic.
That's right. For another podcast episode. Yeah,
that's right. And so now we'll go to the next one.
Okay. So you've overlaid both those graphs together in the next one.
Yeah. So 2 separate axes here. So don't think that the start and the end are coincident, right? But what we actually see is that when you look at the orange, when you look at the hash rate, okay, what we identified as the COVID blip is not a COVID blip. So if we go back to where COVID was, okay, and we try to identify the COVID blip on the Bitcoin network hash rate, there's nothing.
No,
there
straight through.
One, okay.
So that first blip I thought wasn't in fact the COVID blip. That looks like it's more like June of 2021, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I set you up, of course, but what we see here is that the Bitcoin network essentially ignored COVID. So there's no COVID blip. And if you look at a lot of other graphs, stats, metrics, you're going to see a COVID blip. Particularly to do with money, but things like productivity, output, inventories, right? You're going to see some disruption in COVID, not with Bitcoin. Okay, that covers off one of our criticisms, right, is that, what happens in times of emergency, right?
Right.
When people need to, I don't know, fall back on things that are reliable, or when people need to revert to older style of technology. But as a potential risk, I'd say COVID was a pretty big
Pretty big global event,
global
but not
risk,
according to the hash rate. It just kept on trucking.
right? And
Yeah.
and Bitcoin said, okay, I see your COVID, but that's all right. The blip that we saw on the hash rate, it actually happened in May 2021. And so there is a significant dip in the hash rate graph,
Right.
May of 2021. Now, what's significant about this date is that China banned Bitcoin mining.
I remember that.
So China has been doing a flip flop over the years.
Mm.
Same with India, but in this case, China. And China said, well, no, actually, China has a really big wet season. And in the wet season, the water essentially just runs through the dams. They don't have enough consumers of electricity for all of their hydroelectric generation. And so the Bitcoin miners, they move in and they get cheap electricity. And if you got cheap power, even an old miner like this can be profitable, until the government got serious about Bitcoin and said, no, actually, I guess for a number of reasons, they said, we don't like this.
Yeah.
And, it's no longer a permitted activity.
Yeah.
And so we did see a significant blip here in the hash rate. But when you zoom out, looking from today, it's just that. It's just a blip.
Yeah.
So this is another major criticism, or another major risk, let's say, not criticism. A risk is like, well, what happens when people change the rules, right? What happens when regulation comes in and, really strangles the industry? And it's like, well, again, look at the hash rate. We saw that China mining in China was a massive part of the network. And when you come in and you do that, the miners will say, okay, like I said, you've got real physical hard equipment here that they've had to spend money to acquire. Now, the other thing about these miners, right, is that they're also Bitcoiners. Okay. So these people aren't going to, go get a different mining job somewhere, right? There only is Bitcoin mining.
Right. That is their one thing that they do well.
And
Yeah.
so they understand the situation very well. And so they unplugged all their miners and they just moved them out of the country.
Right.
Truck after truck after truck. And so we can see the hash rate, the network adjusts. If you unplug all the miners from the network, then actually the blocks get slower. And so rather than coming every 10 minutes, it's every 11, every 12. A couple of days ago, we saw, unrelated, but we saw a block. It took like 2 hours for the next block to come in. This is where the network gets really slow because you're waiting for that transaction to show up.
Right. It's constipated.
And then the mempool fills up and it needs to clear. That's right. And so the miners moved and things recovered again fairly quickly. And now we're at all-time highs. We're at all-time highs. I mean,
massive.
Not all-time highs in price, but might as well be for our memory in crypto.
So here we're saying upwards and to the right with this graph, we're at like a lot of hash power is currently flowing through the Bitcoin network.
All-time high. And if you are into your mathematics, you can fit a curve to this. That is exponential growth in the network. And so then bring up some more questions here, right? Like, where is this exponential growth coming from? Like, more people are plugging in, more people are buying equipment. These things aren't cheap. A new miner today, you're looking at, say, 5,000 to 10,000 US for one single unit,
which could be similar to this, but better technology, right?
Better technology. It would be about 10 times better than this in terms of the output.
Okay, so why is it going up? Why is it going on this exponential curve? What does it mean?
It means that people are excited and interested. It means that people are valuing this idea of digital scarcity, valuing this idea of immutability. People are recognizing the network for being extremely secure, having tremendous uptime, and then all of the other things that you can do with a computing network, on top of all these bolt-on plug-in things that you can do.
With this mining rig that we have here, you mentioned it's not a very good machine by today's standards, and it uses a lot of power. It's like 1,600 watts. 1,600 watts. You run that bad boy all day long, you're going to be paying a little bit more on your power bill, but it sets off a phenomenal amount of heat, pretty much just like a fan heater in your room. So if I was just thinking about this, is there any reason why everybody wouldn't have one of these things in their home to heat their homes in the winter? if the Bitcoin that it could produce would help subsidize the power bill. I know that's kind of a bit of a weird question, but just like, do people kind of use these as heaters?
You're asking dangerous questions here, Darcy, right? Well, we would need winter here in New Zealand, first of all. Maybe we have to go down south.
That's right, yeah.
Um,
Two Canadians having a question about New Zealand winter,
yeah.
right? It's not the same.
So, I mean, the practical reason would be that it is noisy.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you plug it into, let's say you plug it into an apartment or a 1 or 2 bedroom, or there's even a 3 bedroom space,
Yeah.
You're only going to want to run it when you're not there, or you're going to want to put some insulating measures,
Yeah.
right? So it's not optimized for like
Quietness.
household comfort, right?
Yeah.
These things are optimized to run in a shipping container. I mean, they're not optimized for anything. They're optimized.
They're slaves, like you said,
for efficiency and for hashing SHA-256. People are heating swimming pools with Bitcoin miners, right? So the output of this, you get 2 outputs. You get heat, like quality dry heat, and you get Bitcoin.
Yeah.
For a miner, it's expensive, but you get these Bitcoins, and there's an added benefit here to either being close to the mining operation or doing it yourself, is that new minted Bitcoins have no history. So they have no prior transactions attached to them. They have no KYC at Binance.
So this is really fascinating, because I think a lot of people, when they think about Bitcoin in general, they might think that it's used by criminals and money launderers, but it's actually incredibly difficult, I would imagine, when everything is on a public blockchain and everyone can see where everything's going, to actually launder money. If you're buying it from one place and then you're moving it to another one, it's going to be visible, right? But why is this different? So we're not going to an exchange like Easy Crypto or Binance. We're not buying crypto with our fiat currency when we're doing a mining operation. We're basically plugging into the wall and we're feeding it electricity, and then it magically turns into Bitcoin that gets sent to our wallet, right? Is that pretty much how it works?
Aside from the magic part, yes.
That's right. Yeah. Science is magic in my world.
That's
when you don't understand
that's
it, right?
exactly how it works, right? So yeah, you're paying your utility company, right? And oh, by the way, right, Bitcoin miners are paying for their electricity. They're not stealing electricity, right? There might be bad apples here and there, and then as a business, also you're paying your taxes, right?
Yeah.
So you're paying into the economy that is allowing you to consume electricity. Hopefully it's cheap, right? And you're participating in that sense. If you're connected to a mining pool, or if you have a big enough operation to do it yourself, your output is just a wallet address that's filling up with Bitcoin.
It's not is it as simple as saying that when you run a mining rig, you will get X amount, or is it's variable, isn't it? Like, there's no guarantee
Well,
that you're going to get
it depends on this orange line here, right? So it depends on the hash rate. So when a bunch of miners left China, we noticed that other miners were coming online, and so this is one of the dynamics of the network. And you could play this out. Imagine, similar to China, a giant nation state apparatus that says, "Hey, actually, this is our last hope. We better mine some Bitcoin," and they pour a ton of resources into it, right? Like maybe El Salvador, but on a grand, like American scale. If a large player then comes offline for whatever reason, disaster, regulation, aliens, whatever it may be.
Yeah, aliens, most likely.
Definitely. Then what happens is that gives other people a chance, because it's now more profitable for them to join the network.
Why is it more profitable?
So it becomes more profitable because the
hash rate goes
difficulty
down,
adjusts down. In other words, it's easier
yes
to mine a block. It's all on paper. There's lots of calculators online, or do it yourself, and you can work out what your profitability is going to be.
Got it.
And you can even have thresholds, right? And you can set up a power controller that's monitoring the grid, so that either when the price of electricity comes down, or the hash rate comes down, right, or the price or the value of Bitcoin goes up, all of these factors in play,
and it turns on more or less,
and
right?
It turns on more or less miners. And so the network is proving to be extremely resilient. And so back to our zombie apocalypse, you could imagine a lot of the large mining players going down, getting blacked out for whatever reason, right?
Yeah.
A bunch of people like me are going to haul their crap out of their closet and plug it in and start mining, and the network's going to recover.
Right. So this could actually be seen as a form of insurance for the zombie apocalypse as well.
That's a great way to put it. And you do see these things get junked and get scrapped as they get replaced with newer miners.
Yeah.
But the idea of peer-to-peer participation is that maybe you're doing that as a business, right?
Yeah.
But maybe everyone is heating their home or their garage or their swimming pool, or
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
you just happen to have one,
Yeah.
and then you want to participate. You can do so just by plugging it in and having an internet connection.
Okay. And so going back to the lack of AML or KYC, so anti-money
Yep.
laundering legislation or know your customer, these are the things that we would have to do if we were using a crypto on or off ramp. Whereas when we are mining directly, those those bits of legislation actually don't apply, do they?
No, and there's no way that you're going to get your hands on it either, right?
Right.
Because uh, it's quite opaque between consuming electricity, right, and outputting in a peer-to-peer network some coins to an address. On conception of that Coinbase reward, those first coins that get sent out upon a new block being found, right, they have no fingerprints on them, right, and so whoever does get there, often it's a mining pool, and then those rewards get split up to all the participants, right? But I mean, you can imagine there's like a Hollywood script in here, right? Where there's a couple of different stories, but there's a script in here where like a small independent miner wins a block, and then suddenly they go from like zero to million or billionaire because they've got all these bitcoins that are KYC free, and that, imagine the freedom.
Got it. Effectively, we might have situations where there's black market sales of Bitcoin by independent miners who are selling it at a premium, kind of like at a premium over spot, like what you would see in, say, physical gold markets, because some people might not want to be seen on that grid. And it is quite, like I say, it's quite an obvious place to be seen on the blockchain, right?
Yeah, so I think this market is going to emerge. We haven't really seen it yet, but we have heard of miners accepting bribes for this and that, and
Right.
so on. Including transactions or for censoring other transactions. But
Right.
there's a case to be made that Coinbase reward Bitcoin is going to no longer be fungible with the rest of the Bitcoin,
That's
and
interesting.
it's going to be more valuable.
Can you just break that down though? So when you say the Coinbase, like I'm thinking of Coinbase as in,
Yeah. Okay.
so I'm a bit confused about that. Do you want to help me understand the
Yeah.
difference there?
So when the miner meets the threshold and publishes a block,
Yeah.
100 blocks down the track. Okay, so 6 blocks an hour, right? So a little ways down the track, that wallet address gets credited with the Coinbase reward.
We're not talking about Coinbase, the company.
Coinbase was named after this.
Right.
Yeah.
So the Coinbase reward comes from where? It comes from the protocol itself, right?
Coinbase reward comes out of thin air, comes from the
Yeah.
protocol itself.
And that's why it's so weird, as like, it was so weird in the sense that we're almost creating something out of nothing. We're creating it through physics, like power goes into
It's
a
so
machine.
tempting to say it's out of nothing, but right,
Yeah.
it's not
We can't create anything out of nothing,
out of
but
nothing. Yeah.
yeah, we're transforming one state of energy into a financial state of energy, right? Like
Yeah.
it's quite cool when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean,
But
I think Sailor's a bit off his rocker, maybe in a good way, but this is
yeah,
what he does, right?
yeah,
He talks about the
I love his
the
analogies.
the
Yeah,
pure energy, and I maybe think in more practical terms.
if you got a bunch of these rigs, like how much is it going to set me back if I buy one of these right now? $500?
Sidebar here:
Yeah,
during COVID, these things were selling for over $1,000 on Trade Me. They're definitely not worth that much, but there
right.
just aren't any of them in New Zealand.
Would these have come from when China? I noticed that there's Chinese writing all over it. Would this have come from when China instituted their ban? They would have just sold them willy nilly like that. Do you think?
I didn't ask the dude, but he just
It fell out of the back of a van, right? So
fell out of his truck, and I gave
yeah,
him some money. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
But like I said earlier, if you go online and buy one now,
Hmm.
you're looking at 5,000 plus US
Is
dollars
that right? Yeah.
to,
Okay.
to buy one, and it'd be about twice the size that this is now physically,
Yeah.
and so a good size space heater, and then people
Yeah.
build boxes around them or put them in their garage, or yeah.
Again, like as long as your power supply. So if you're running solar, partially or wholly, then it can actually start to make sense to just leave it on all the time, or at least when the sun's out, right?
A few factors at play here for the economics
Yeah.
of mining, but again, it's not super complex. It's just about like being able to lay it all out.
Yeah.
And here in New Zealand, electricity is just too expensive.
Right.
If you're not at a volume where you're making contract purchases
Yeah.
from a supplier,
Just doesn't make sense.
it doesn't make sense. So I'm paying 23 cents a kilowatt hour, and the last time I checked, which is maybe a year ago, last semester, right, I'd be losing I don't know, $10 a day, off being offset a little bit with
Yeah.
what.
But that would have been measured against the price of Bitcoin at the time, right? And so if you were thinking of this as an investment where your investment is buying electricity today, and all of the rewards that you were able to get was just going into a wallet and it was being banked in that wallet, then it's like an investment, isn't it?
It's an investment, and the window that you put on your risk in terms of what happens if the price collapses, it gets quite big, right? Because you're
Right.
watching the price of Bitcoin, and in the recent year to 18 months that we've seen a number of operations shut down because
Just doesn't work.
just can't afford it.
Right.
They're not earning enough pure Bitcoin to sell at market value to cover their
Right.
costs.
I guess that's
Yeah,
the art with mining, right?
that is, I mean, I think that's the art with business as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? Having someone that can
Yeah.
see the tea leaves a little bit, and
Yeah.
then
I'm
and then
fascinated by this. I think
on
it's a
on
cool
the
thing.
other end, if you're sitting on Bitcoin, right, you might want to sell to cover some runway. So
Yeah.
I don't have any insight into that. I think it's
Yeah.
psychology is incredibly difficult,
Yeah.
but this is what the miners are doing. And like I mentioned earlier
Yeah.
about the miners are also, they're also people, right?
Yeah.
They're Bitcoiners. They're invested in this,
Yeah.
and so the idea that changing the regulations or superseding their technology with something better is going to push them out of the market doesn't always add up, because Bitcoiners aren't always rational like that. And so, you know, there are scenarios where you would want to mine at a loss if you could afford your power,
Right.
or for whatever reason, because you're still holding on to that Bitcoin.
Right. And Bitcoiners generally, individuals anyway, understand it to the point where they realize that they will make sacrifices to own more of this thing because they believe in the future of it. And where would you describe yourself? Like you would kind of, you're into Bitcoin, but you're not necessarily someone who's like fanatical, right? Like you would
I,
be, you're still
I,
balanced enough to lead a life and have a relationship with people, right?
I am, yeah, I'm not fanatical, but
Yeah.
I am fanatic about like cool shit. And
Yeah.
to me, this is like all of it. I brought the miner today just to actually to talk about
Yeah.
criticism, one of these criticisms,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I'm definitely like a fanatic about doing things yourself, right? Putting your skin in the game, experiment with it, right? Lose some money,
Yeah.
right? You can't say that as a financial advisor.
That's right.
I can say that
Can
to
you say
my
it for me though, Jeff?
to my students, right? Like like buy some of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
First buy some Bitcoin,
Yeah.
then buy some Ethereum, right? Then buy something else, right? Don't buy too much, right? But
Yeah.
buy some,
Yeah.
play around with it, see what it can do,
Yeah.
and really get yourself invested in it. And like, if I was a fanatic, I would be locating, or I would be setting up an operation that has cheap electricity, or that has profitable
Yeah.
setup for electricity,
Yeah.
and I could see myself being in the mining business for sure.
Yeah. And now that we have this solid sort of understanding around the mechanics of how Bitcoin is created and just some of the dynamics at play, hopefully it'll kind of make a little bit more sense. But if we kind of just go through some of these things, and this all this stuff comes from a report which I'll link to in the show notes for people that want to read along. Really well written. Like Fidelity is, in terms of an asset manager, they're massive, but they actually they kind of get it, right? Like a lot of this stuff, it's not rocket science what they're saying,
They know their
but
stuff.
yeah, they do.
They for sure have Bitcoiners on staff.
Yeah, yeah, they get it.
My feeling is that they're sending this out to everyone, saying like, do your homework,
Yeah,
because
we're gonna get serious.
something's coming,
Yeah,
and we've already seen hints of
yeah,
this.
interesting.
So anyways, so they just kind of, it's a nice easy primer. So Bitcoin is too volatile to be a store of value, and absolutely Bitcoin is volatile. The idea that volatility is a bad thing, I don't necessarily know where it came from,
I know.
but
Yeah,
it's absurd, right? Look at every
yeah,
successful person, look at every wealthy person, every wealthy family,
yeah,
and talk about what volatile to the upside they've been able to leverage and ride.
in my industry, let's just say it's our fault for labeling volatility as bad, because I think we kind of do. We're we are always trying to keep people safe because regulators and clients, and we need to sleep well at night. We don't want anyone to lose any money, right? And so the only option really is to steer them away from volatility, but in the process, we're also steering them away from gains. In reality, not everybody can handle the jandle, right? Like not everybody can actually really go through what it takes to get upwards and to the right. They like the concept of it, but when it starts to happen and volatility affects them,
Yep.
they don't.
It is a tough one. I think all we can say is like, yes, Bitcoin is volatile.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, I guess if you can't handle it, you can go back to doing what you're doing, but like, don't write it off because you
Yeah.
think it's volatile, right?
Yeah.
And you can, once you get into more and more of it, once you look at zoom out on the price chart and things
Yeah.
like that, you're like, oh, it's volatile.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
hang on.
It's further conflated with the word risk, right? Because risk and volatility in investing land is often the same thing, but risk is like the probability of complete loss, whereas volatility is just the movement in price. And so if people are kind of trained to think that if you invest in Bitcoin, you will lose your money and don't invest in the amount that you're not willing to lose, of course you're going to be scared away from it, right?
Of course, you're going to be scared away from it. And once you start learning about the idea of a peer to peer distributed network, that is also going to solidify your own belief in this, right? And so maybe a good tenet in investing is to like invest in what you know. And you can either agree or disagree
No,
with
I agree.
me
Yeah, that makes sense.
on that one, right? So like
Mm.
I'm not out there picking stocks, right? I spend lots of my free time every day reading and learning about cryptocurrency, right? But I am invested in cryptocurrency because I know that.
Yeah.
And if you look around at other people that are in this as well, and if you don't want to listen to some guy on a podcast, that's great, right? But you've also got Fidelity and you've got BlackRock producing promotional materials,
Yeah.
right? Talking about this. And so
Yeah.
there has to be something there.
Yeah, that's right. Like you say, they're putting this kind of literature out there to prepare people for obviously their product that they hope will get approved soon.
Yeah,
With my suspicion.
I think that's what it is. And
Yeah.
honestly, I don't, even though it's easy for like me and you to read, I don't think many people are going to be reading on their own. I think
Mm.
it's more of sales material.
Yeah. Yeah.
So here's what
Yeah.
happens when people say, well, hang on.
Yeah.
Number two, right? Bitcoin has failed as a means of payment. This is another one. We already talked about peer-to-peer cash. This is another one where I think you can like just put a tick on it and say, yeah, it's failed as a means of payment, but there's
So
so much more.
yeah, that's right. It's like I'm trying to think of an analogy here that works really well, but I'm failing. I'm failing. But then again, my job is not to give analogies. And I guess that's the analogy. If we come to this thinking that its purpose is something and it fails on that purpose, it's not the thing's fault. It's your fault because you had incorrect assumptions. And so with Bitcoin, yeah, it did say on the white paper, and what does it say? An electronic peer-to-peer.
Yeah, peer-to-peer electronic cash.
Yeah. And so it does kind of say, it kind of implies that it should be a peer-to-peer medium of exchange, right? Or a means of payment. But I think that's turned into, no, it's got to replace the payment system. So we shouldn't be using FPOS anymore. And I can't buy a liter of milk using Bitcoin. Therefore, it must have failed. Where did we go wrong with that?
Yeah, I mean, those two things are so far apart. To be fair, when you first read about it, you're like, okay, that kind of makes sense.
Mm.
But once you learn more and more about it, like those things couldn't be more disparate. And so they go on to mention, the Lightning Network.
That just mean like it's kind of like an abstraction, or it's a holding account, if you like, where transactions can happen really fast and then occasionally tap into the base layer to settle. Is that kind of the idea?
If you know that the main thoroughfare, the main rails are expensive, you're only going to batch up your transactions and publish when you need to.
So it's batching.
That's how it's set up to do. And by the way, it also provides tremendous privacy as well. And so
Right.
if you're thinking about auditing, KYC, taxation, these types of things, Lightning Network is not very popular.
Because it's batching everything up and it's kind of going into a pool to be processed rather than every single tiny little transaction.
That's right.
Is that
So
right?
your peer-to-peer activity on the Lightning Network is
Yeah.
essentially untrackable. There are hints of things you can do going in and out of the main chain,
Yeah.
but compared to Bitcoin,
Yeah.
it's very, very different.
Yeah.
There's a ton of activity, like developers building stuff
Yeah.
on Lightning. There's also, we don't yet know if Lightning's going to be able to scale appropriately.
Okay. So let's move on to number 3. So Bitcoin is a wasteful or it is bad for the environment.
I guess maybe 2023, this year, has been
Yeah.
all about this, in terms of
Yeah.
Bitcoin criticism. And just last week, there was an opinion published by a pseudo academic at I think he's in the Netherlands, Alex de Vries is his name.
Okay.
And so he published an opinion in this journal called Cell. And the headline transaction that everybody grabbed is that every time you transact in Bitcoin, you use a swimming pool's worth of water.
Nice.
Right?
Right.
A whole swimming pool of fresh water just gets chucked back into the ocean every time.
And every time you don't turn that light switch off, God murders another kitten.
Poor kittens, right?
Yeah, it's terrible.
And so, I mean, I don't want to sit here today and dispute this, but things like this come out where people are trying to make a link to something that we identify as valuable, which is fresh water.
Yeah.
And then they're trying to conflate that with that idea that Bitcoin transactions are evil.
That's right. It's just destroying this good thing, but really it's just a reference point.
And
we've used this miner before, like before we started.
We just plugged it in. Did we waste any water?
I didn't see it happen.
Okay,
maybe it did happen somewhere else in the world. I don't know.
I didn't see it happen either. But these types of criticisms, they come and go.
Yeah.
And the Bitcoiners, the literature is getting better at publishing stats about this idea of being able to capture excess energy in the grid. Also about using more renewables, compared to fossil fuel burning plants, things like this, using things like hydroelectric and or solar and other. And, we talked about the miners up and leaving China, right?
Yeah.
So they were parked near hydroelectric dams, and they up and they leave and they go park near some other power source, right? And so that's advantageous.
They were basically soaking up cheap electricity.
Maybe I'll just say two things here about electricity and mining. The first is that these miners are paying market price for I mean, they might have a contract they might have negotiated a slightly different rate, but the miners are playing by the rules. The electricity is a market like any others. It may be run a little bit different. It may have a large amount of subsidy. It's still a market. And so the miners are just participating in the market, just like a hospital, right? Just like data centers, just like air conditioners. Speaking of swimming pools and data centers and air conditioners, right? There's all these comparisons. How much energy does Bitcoin use? And it's like, well, it doesn't use as much as like all of the tumble dryers in America, or like an order of magnitude less than worldwide air conditioning, or like heating a swimming pool, right?
Yeah.
And you think like, well, what's the common thing about drying your clothes, warm swimming pool, or hot water, running water, or air conditioning? Like all these things are tremendous improvements to humanity that everybody loves. And we've gotten really good as engineers. We've gotten really good at making these processes efficient.
Yeah.
One more point about electricity is that from a producer's point of view, if you own a hydroelectric dam, as soon as you generate electricity, it gets consumed. So electricity moves at a high fraction of the speed of light. The speed of light is very quick.
Yeah.
So as soon as a turbine spins in Manipuri, a lot of that electricity is used at the aluminum smelter down there. If it's still on as of today, I'm not sure when it's shutting down.
Yeah.
But it's also consumed here in Auckland. That's that. Right. So it's a high fraction of the speed of light that electricity gets consumed. So this is why we need electrical grids. And this is why we have trouble during peak demands, is because you can't just generate more electricity. The power engineers need to know this in advance. And so the Bitcoin miners, they come in and they say, well, hey, rather than flaring that gas, or rather than shedding that load, we'll take it off your hands. We'll pay you for it. So you earn some income. We earn some Bitcoin from it. Everybody wins.
Yeah.
And then, oh, by the way, if you need that electricity during a really hot day for all the air conditioners, or more likely in the winter months for electric heating, right? During a really cold spell, then we're going to shut down our equipment so that you have more available.
Yeah. Soaks up excess supply and allows it to come back online. So it's a throttler.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of people that are quite articulate about this topic, and it's starting to gain some traction.
Yeah. I've caught up with Simon Collins a couple of times.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, trying to catch up with Daniel Batten as well, who's really good around the, I guess, the methane gas to Bitcoin mining. But using it not only to say, like using a Bitcoin mining operation, not only to say that, hey, it's actually not doing any harm, but to go even further and to say it could actually be instrumental to help the build out of a renewable energy infrastructure is kind of what I start to think about and think how cool that would be, because now we have a need for the electricity that can instantly be created while the lines infrastructure is upgraded to bring it to other parts of the network. I don't know if I've said that the right way, but
No, that makes
it's
sense. There's this more of a time lag, right, between bringing new capacity online and being able to ship it to all your customers, just like you said with the transmission lines and things like this.
yeah,
So if you're going to upgrade your grid, you have to upgrade, the generation, you have to upgrade the transmission, the transformers, and all of it, and you can't just do that all at
mm,
once.
yeah,
So perhaps there's a role there for uh, some quasi temporary business to come in and set up and buy your cheap
yeah.
capacity,
Dump the shipping containers down and off you go.
and then move out
Yeah,
as soon as you're done or when your contract's done,
yeah,
and that's it. You pick it up, you're gone. There's no footprint, right?
yeah.
There's no kitten carcasses
That's right.
or swimming pools of tainted water. Yeah, just
Swimming pools and kittens today, man. There we go. All right, let's go on to another criticism here. We're making some progress. So what's this one? Bitcoin will be replaced by a competitor. So this is like I hear this. Probably this is like the number one thing if I was to talk to somebody about Bitcoin who has heard of the word, might have heard something about it, but the number one thing that comes up usually is, why would I buy Bitcoin when somebody else could just do it? And there's like over thousands and thousands and thousands of these things. Why would I want to do that when there's all these other ones? So could it ever be replaced by a competitor? And if not, why not?
of course it could be replaced by a competitor, right? We don't know what's going to happen. I think it is, particularly from the Bitcoin crowd, I think it is short-sighted to say that in the year 2140 we're going to see the final Bitcoin get mined. The
Mm,
network will be running entirely on transaction. Like 100 years out from now,
mm,
nobody has any idea what the world's going to look like, right?
mm,
We could maybe apply like the Lindy effect and say like we're 15 years in, so probably in 15 years the network will still be around,
mhm,
and hopefully it's stronger than it is today.
mhm,
But that doesn't mean it for sure. The Lindy effect, right? It just says that like if you've been around a long time, you're probably going to continue to be
mhm,
around a long time. And we've seen BSV wither and die, right? We've
mhm.
seen Bitcoin Cash propped
Yeah,
up by Roger Ver. It I would say maybe is surviving, but
yeah,
barely, right?
yeah,
And you go to CoinGecko and you type in Bitcoin and you see all the 25 to 45 results of different versions of Bitcoin,
yeah,
right? And then look at the chart and see how people value them, right? And then look for the orange hash rate chart and see what happened, right?
yeah,
And so who knows what's going to happen in the future, but for
yeah,
now,
yeah,
people are exponentially buying into both the network in terms of mining, and we've seen a price bump.
yeah.
We've seen holders lose 85% of their
That's right.
paper value and not flinch. Is everybody crazy? Probably not. It's probably
Yeah,
because they really believe in this thing.
yeah. And why do you think that is? Like, just to take a slight little tangent here, why do you think it is that people really believe in this thing? Why do we believe in Bitcoin?
For me, it's because of what it represents. Like it gives you a shot at participating
Yeah.
in something that most folks have absolutely no chance.
Mm,
In terms of access to cheap money. In terms of like evading or bending various laws of inheritances or gifting and things like this. Right, like
mm,
um, there's a lot that the financial elite can do that most people cannot do, and this represents a way out, and there's some cool tech behind it as well,
mm,
and so that's what it is for me. Like to give you a bit more of like my personal motivation, I was like a young lad in my early 20s at
yeah,
university when the GFC hit, and I was like watching this news cycle, global financial crisis, Lehman Brothers. I had no idea what was going on, right? But I saw what happened to my parents. I saw what happened to my family, and I saw what happened to a lot of other folks that sort of have a house and a couple jobs, and that's really what they've got, a pension account.
yeah,
There's this like line in time, right? Like Chancellor on the brink of bailout, 2008, and there's this line where you look at like the age of these hardcore Bitcoiners, right?
mm,
They're all like my age.
yeah,
And then if this is like a good thing and if it succeeds, it's going to spill over and younger folks are going to pick it up. And we're seeing that in various other forms.
yeah.
Maybe they're not yet propping up the network with miners and developers, but
If we drew a bell curve to show where like the peak Bitcoiner sits, what age do you think you would be? Like you mentioned that you were in your formative years, I guess, when you saw that happening to your family. I know for me, I'm older than you, so I was already in business when I saw that happen. I could see it through like the stuff that I was involved in. Being in New Zealand, obviously, we're a little bit less sensitive to it,
Right.
which is probably why we're not so fast in understanding why it's so important. But what do you think the average age is, or what is the average makeup? Not necessarily age related, but the average makeup of the qualities, characteristics that those people possess who really understand Bitcoin well.
Yeah, I think it's a bit younger than me. I'm an old millennial, and so if I'm just opining here, right, it's got to be like late 30s,
Yeah,
I would say, where you're old enough to know that you have to be financially responsible to leave a good life for your family, right?
yeah,
Um, you're old enough to have either memories or to have had time to study up on things like the GFC,
yeah,
right? You're also old enough to have experience at tech. You're okay with this idea of digital scarcity.
yeah.
You're okay with online passwords and all these things that older folks
Struggle with, yeah.
can struggle with generally.
Would you say that it's harder for someone in New Zealand or Canada or the US to understand the use case of Bitcoin compared to Argentina, Venezuela,
Oh, you nailed it,
Russia?
Darcy.
Yeah,
100%. It is so hard to see outside our
yeah,
own borders. It's so hard to
yeah.
see outside your own household.
True.
This hasn't been so much the narrative recently, but before there was a lot of we don't need this here,
Yeah,
America centric type stuff,
yeah,
you know, and that still does exist, but
yeah,
much more realization that it's a global network. The internet is global. Bitcoin is global.
yeah.
You can shut it down in China. I looked this up recently. There's about 10 countries that have banned Bitcoin mining and transactions,
Right.
and it represents about 2 billion people. So
Yeah,
a fair number, obviously most are in China.
yeah.
A fair number of people legally do not have access to this.
Even if they had this type of machine on the black market and had access to power, would how does a ban actually work for them? Because can that be seen apart from the power consumption?
Yeah, I mean the ban works when you try to go use your bitcoins or when you try to exit,
Sure.
right?
Right. Yeah.
That's where and you don't have to go chase people, right? All you
Right.
have to do is say, if you're found having funds from here, then
Yeah.
you're on a list.
Like going back to some criticism, I'm not sure if this would be on the list necessarily, but like on the topic of bans on Bitcoin, this isn't necessarily a ban on Bitcoin itself, but let's just say, for example, in this hypothetical 1984 esque world where we all have to have digital IDs like licenses to use the internet, how valuable is Bitcoin to the hardcore individual there who doesn't want to comply with some form of hyper control?
Trying to broadly censor the internet is problematic. But having said that, there's a lot of smart people out there, and there's a lot of people willing to volunteer their time and effort to create alternatives, right? Whether they're alternatives for good or evil is up for debate, but that doesn't really worry me. Um,
Okay. So it doesn't worry you that the internet will be restricted to people who might want to use Bitcoin on it, and therefore not have access to their Bitcoin.
I think that is highly impractical. The idea of, I mean, you've got the Great Firewall of China as a perfect example of how to do this, right? Talk to your local Chinese student and ask them what it's like coming from China and coming to New Zealand. They're fine. They're doing fine. So I don't think these problems are going to go away.
Right.
I think there is going to be a lot of tension around the use of Bitcoin.
Right.
There's going to be a lot of tension ongoing that we're going to experience in the future about on ramps, about off ramps. Easy crypto has held up tremendously well,
Mm.
but I think they're sweating. I'm sweating for them. I think they're doing a great job so far.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully they can continue to do so, right? But we need more
Mm.
competition. How can there only be
Mm.
one, or maybe, I mean, at least one that will probably accept a Kiwi Bank deposit, right?
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is where the
That's
tension
right.
and this is where the battles are going to be fought.
Is the interchange between the fiat financial
Yeah,
system?
Bitcoin is going to be fine. It's going to keep running. Nobody's going to be able to stop packets on the internet. You can't tell what packets are on the internet anyways.
Mm.
So no one's going to be able to stop that. If you want to like play out the long game here, people are just going to vote with their feet and they're going to leave, right?
Mm.
Uh, and let's say you have half a Bitcoin,
Yeah.
right? That in 10, 15 years, it's conceivable that could be enough to move an entire family to a new country, buy a passport,
Yeah.
settle down,
Yeah.
and continue doing what it is that you like to do, whatever that may be.
So it equips the sovereign individual, or it enables them to be able to move
Yeah,
and
like it's no
escape.
surprise this Bitcoin maps nicely to this idea of a sovereign individual. Maybe not complete independence, but
Yeah.
sort of the idea. I think Balaji has mapped this out of like joining up with other crypto minded folks. Eventually, right, if you've got enough people that have Bitcoin all in the same spot, you don't need to worry about your on and your off ramps.
That's right, because they form their own direct community at another layer, right?
Yeah,
They're not founded, or they're not on top of the fiat layer. They've already moved their wealth into the digital layer, and that's
that's
really what
right.
this is about, right? Like
Like
this is, yeah,
we think people that move to the woods and are off the grid are a bit out of it, right? But
yeah,
so are Bitcoiners that want to join together and like,
yeah,
it's not that they want to avoid paying their legal taxes or anything like this. It's just that they want the option to
yeah.
transact in a different system.
I think that's the weird thing about it, and that's why that, like, the whole topic of tax. We won't go too far into that one because that's too dangerous. But if you didn't believe that it was right to pay tax, then immediately you're a target for the state. Understandably so, right? Like that's kind of the deal. But if you don't have choice around whether or not you want to even be a part of a nation state, what are your options? And I guess Bitcoin and I guess digital assets have, to a certain extent, shown us that there is a new realm, I guess you'd call it, like the digital world. Like that is kind of like a new space, a new place. And so if you're giving us value in the digital realm, then yeah, fair enough. What's the revenue model for you, nation state? But it has to change, right?
Some's got to give, yeah. And
Yeah.
like, let's get all this out of the way and get on with it. Like,
Yeah. So this tension that we're talking about is multifaceted, isn't it? Because you can't just go from the old to the new without there being a bit of a tussle, right?
that's right. Yeah, you can never supersede the new without a bit of friction. And I think unfortunately, uh, the worst case is war, another Hollywood plot line, right?
Yeah.
I think that there will be wars,
Yeah.
maybe not. I don't know on what scale, but I think that there will be,
Mm.
violent action taken, which has Bitcoin at the center of it.
Well, we've kind of seen skirmishes in the last few years where Bitcoin was at the center of it. And so, and I guess if we look at, most hot wars are kind of like highly correlated to financial change. Like if you think about, Yom Kippur, Nixon taking US dollar fully off the gold standard, um, when the U.S. Fed was created, Bretton Woods. These are eras where it seems like conflict and monetary change seems to happen at the same time. Even with the Russian conflict, the U.S. kicking Russia off the SWIFT system. I know that that's not maybe massive in our eyes, but I think that was like a critical
Yeah,
turning point in this whole conflict. And there is something to be said about the U.S. basically being the global policeman, and the dominance of the US dollar, and how that's seriously being challenged right now, right?
yeah. The U.S. centric nature of things is for sure being challenged. What happened? I'm aware of the SWIFT ban in Russia. Is
Mm,
that still ongoing? That
yeah.
and Russia then spun up their own version to try to do business with their local partners.
Yeah. Well, I guess they find a way, right? And who was it that has an account? There's basically a swap arrangement now between China and, is it China and Russia? Or was it China and a South American country? I can't remember, but they effectively have essentially, like, and the BRICS plus nations are kind of moving more towards this, but they already are kind of doing direct deals, bypassing, oh, maybe it was Saudi,
Yeah,
going outside the petrodollar system. So these deals are happening where countries need to trade with each other, and they just need to find a common medium of exchange to bypass the US dollar system. And it's like you're starving that system, which is actually currently trying to keep the world safe in terms of shipping. Like, yeah, this morning I was reading some news around the Suez Canal, which is,
right.
I think, connects the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean, I think, but it goes past Yemen. And so the Yemenis, like or not the Yemenis, sorry, the Iranian-backed Houthis were basically attacking U.S. ships now, and cargo ships as well. So that's pretty like this is full on. Like there is this conflict that's going on with commerce, which we can see in the financial system and in the physical system, which again, like when we talk about Bitcoin, now we have an alternative financial network that we as individuals can use, which creates this tension between the state. Like this starts to get pretty heavy, doesn't it? Yeah.
It gets so heavy, and like all headlines, right? This bit about the Suez Canal, all
Yeah.
headlines lead to Bitcoin. Once you've got this lens,
Yeah.
unfortunately, it takes a long time. It takes a long time to get there, and like
Yeah.
it takes it takes less time if you've already been studying up on how the financial system works, right?
Yeah.
On like this idea of what is money, right? First you got to dig into that, and then you got to also maybe dig into the tech. Do you trust decentralized systems? What does that word even mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack there, but once you do,
Yeah.
like it all gets laid out for you.
One of the major themes of the podcast that I always keep on coming back to this, which is we're building new wealth for the new world. So we have to kind of think of those two things. What does new wealth look like? And then what does the new world look like? And if you are building wealth for the past, then use what we already know. That's fine. Just keep on going with your 80-20 portfolio and your mainstream asset classes. Don't worry about it. But if the world is changing, which I think now it's pretty obvious it is, then what will be value in that new world? And that's why, like for me anyway, that's why Bitcoin makes so much sense, because now we have digital scarcity that we can own in this digital world. And if we know that we're going more into a digital world, then really that's all you need to know.
You don't want to call somebody on the street and say, "Hey, look, I've got some digital scarcity for you." And let's start with like native internet money and like
Yeah.
that.
Oh, yeah, yeah. That's
And
good.
like that's hard enough on its own, like native internet money, right? We think
Yeah,
our
yeah.
money is on the internet because we can use our credit card. But
Yeah.
like let's start there. Like why
Yeah.
we're all so smart and technological and everything works all the time. Why is there not? Why did it take so long for
Yeah.
native internet money to come around?
Yeah. That makes sense, right?
And so the
Yeah.
money that we have now, uh, I would say it works pretty good, but it's very steep learning curve, very hard UX,
Yeah.
and it's introduced a lot of friction.
And are you talking about like the fiat financial
No, I
system
mean the
in the
digital
digital?
money that we have
Oh,
now.
sure.
So
Right.
using Bitcoin, using Ethereum, using Dogecoin,
Yeah.
right? Uh, to someone that knows what they're doing, it works
Yes.
and it's exciting.
Yeah.
To someone that doesn't know what they're doing, it's
Yeah.
very difficult to arrive at that.
Absolutely. And I guess that kind of brings us almost full circle. There's two ways you can benefit from where Bitcoin might be going. You can hold it directly, which is really kind of like ideally that's kind of what you want to try to be doing, at least a little bit of, not financial advice.
Right.
But the other reason is for the financial benefit, which is, in my mind, it's a watered down reason, but it's still a very valid reason. In other words, get exposure to the price benefit of owning Bitcoin, the price being in your fiat currency. And that's where the ETF comes in really handy, because now you can allocate some of your portfolio to Bitcoin. And if it does go to the moon, or at least halfway there, yeah, I'll give you a possibility about performance, right?
That's right.
Um,
The what do they call this? The asymmetric upside. Like you have more to gain than you do to lose, and
yeah,
that's hard to think about with money because we have this loss aversion.
yes,
It was hard work getting that paycheck, right? It was
yeah,
hard work doing that deal,
yes,
and I want to hold on to that because losing it would hurt more
yeah,
than the effort it took to gain. And
yeah,
so trying to flip that around and say, well, when someone tells you there's like even those words, right?
yeah.
Like I sound like such a crypto bro. It's an asymmetric upside bet, right?
Irresponsibly long, Jeff. If we look at the last 3 years, let's just say we had 6% annual inflation rate, $100,000 a year 3 years ago. If that was what you were earning, 100 grand a year, if you're not earning $119,000 today as your annual salary, then you've actually gone backwards
That's right.
with a 6% inflation rate.
Yeah.
So that hurts when you do the math, but most people don't. Most people are like, no, it's our currency that's valuable, and I don't want to lose that for this thing which is new. It's only 15 years old. It's speculative. Governments might ban it. It's bad for the environment. Go down the list of, you know.
Go down the list. Yeah.
But really, no one is ever really talking about what inflation does.
I
You
think
know?
that's changing though.
Yeah, I
Uh,
hope so.
I think we are starting to. The math is honestly still hard for most people.
Yeah.
And it's, because it's math, it's not that it's hard. You can type in the numbers and like look at the result, but
Yeah.
I think it's hard to conceive of on a, day to day.
It requires effort. Like a lot of aspects of investing, you do need to put on a little bit of effort if you want to get more than an average rate of return. If you want average index, great. Believe in compounding myself. I think it's great. But if you want more than the average, you're going to have to think about things like riskier assets or more volatile asset, to be more technically true. Before we finish up, though, I want to keep on going with maybe at least one more of these ones. And this criticism here, number 5, Bitcoin isn't backed by anything. Um, what's your view on this? Like, I have a lot of kind of Michael Saylor-esque answers to this one,
Yeah.
but what's your view around what Bitcoin is backed by, if it can be said to be backed by something?
Yeah. So I mean, Bitcoin is not backed by anything is an absurdist statement, right?
Right.
It's not backed. Very few things that we do for value are backed by anything. So a lot of what we do for value comes down to, a trust in a handshake, trust in a business agreement that we're going to put in some time and effort, and you
Mm,
know generally we use money for value, so we earn some money after that.
mm,
And then you go home and you say, well, that effort that I put in, like, was that backed by anything? And you say, like, is my effort considered an asset? Am I an asset? And of course, as a business owner, you
mhm.
and your time are an incredibly valuable asset. But
Yeah.
a lot of us aren't thinking about things like this. So um, I think the question is a little bit absurd, but I also think that talking about if it's backed by something, we should have a good answer, right? As an educator, when a student says, "Hey, why are we learning this?" Right, you should always have an answer, whether it's a good answer or sometimes there is not a good answer, but there should always be a response there. And so,
Right.
I think Bitcoin is backed by a ton of stuff. That's why I brought in the miner today, right?
Yeah.
So we've got something physical, right?
Yeah.
There's 189 chips in here. If
Mm,
you've ever done the YouTube dive on how a chip is made,
right.
I highly recommend it. There's a book called Chip War, which also
Right.
takes you through how Silicon Valley got its name and how chips are made. So
Right.
if you look at the human hours, if you look at the university degrees, the men and women, the effort that it's taken humans to build chips, there's 189 of them in
Right.
in here, right? So there is something tangible backing the network, but that's not all there is to it, right?
Right.
There's also the people that believe in it.
Right.
So uh, the difficulty can adjust down. So honestly, like, mathematically, Bitcoin cannot go to zero. It will never go to zero because all you need is one person.
Right.
I mean, you need two people to transact, but all you need is one person running a node.
Right.
And you can assign value to that. So mathematically, Bitcoin's not going to go to zero.
Yeah.
Talking about money. So you've got the people, you've got the hardware, and then you've got the asset, right? And Bitcoin has such a tremendous incentive here that once you start participating in the network, you want to either participate more or you have vested interest in keeping that network alive.
Right.
And it's kind of like this like meta cycle that it produces the bitcoins, and bitcoins are the asset that give it value, that produce the bitcoins,
Right.
and it cycles together. And so
Yeah.
and so the value is real. I mean, if you find an off ramp, right,
Yeah.
you can sell a Bitcoin for a
Yeah.
lot of fiat value. So the value is real,
Yeah.
the people are real, the hardware is real,
Yeah.
and then you can pull out your favorite characteristics. A lot of people in crypto land like censorship resistance,
Yeah.
right, as holding up that as a priority, meaning that anybody can join and leave at any time, and anybody, if you pay the fee, can get your transaction included.
Right.
So no censorship in that way, and surely that has value. Like,
Yeah.
if that doesn't have value,
Yeah.
I mean, and so you could go on and on, pick your favorite
Yeah.
characteristics, and it's not just a list that I'm curating, right? Like, people have slightly different answers.
Yeah.
Sailor loves his, like, time and space energy type
Yeah.
of thing, and he's right too.
We probably need to finish up. If people kind of are still struggling, I'm going to put some links into the show notes around these reports from Fidelity, because they're good, and they're fairly legit and well respected people. But what would you recommend as either people to follow or books to read, Jeff?
Yeah, so books to read. So I mean, I guess people point to the Bitcoin Standard uh, as a primer for this one, and I think that's fair, because the first 80% of the Bitcoin standard just talks about money.
Yeah.
Another excellent author is Niall Ferguson.
Mm.
So he's a historian. And so he wrote a very accessible book called The Ascent of Money, which is also BBC, or it's also a British television series. You can watch it on YouTube. But the book is accessible. So The Ascent of Money,
Yeah.
and it takes you through a little bit of money's history.
Yeah.
For a better primer, debt, the first 5,000 years. And it sort of straight away, it debunks this idea that humans ever bartered for anything.
Yeah.
It's just way too inefficient. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
And you know, it goes through the idea like we don't need money. You and I, if you want to get a bit about Bitcoin, sure, the Bitcoin standard is good, although it's probably a few years old now, but I'm not sure if there has been sort of a better primer. You can't replace books with blog posts, no matter how much traction that meme gets, right? Because it takes you 10 hours to read a book. You need the time.
Yeah, your brain needs the time to kind of get into alignment with
you can't get a university degree on YouTube because you need 2, 3, 4 years. You need the time to get through it.
So and if people want to follow you as well, where would they follow you?
So you can find me on Twitter, and you can also find, I should probably say this, you can find the blockchain course on GitHub as well.
Okay.
So you can post some links.
Awesome. Thanks for your time today, Jeff.
Cheers, Darcy.